Put your hands up. No. What?
That was me not too long ago and didn't know anything better. People make mistakes, y'all, and that is okay. But what we need to understand when it comes to these mistakes or these types of videos where at first we really didn't know anything is try to do a follow-up and explain what you've learned from now being more in the community. So when I first started learning about PDA, I honestly didn't really know anything until like a few weeks ago, and having this very detailed, informative discussion with Callie. And the video that I just made in talking about like where to start for your PDA research and understanding PDA more from a very informational side of the aspect, I have to thank Callie completely and just for that whole thing, because literally I would not have made that video without them. So please make sure to, follow them. And if you want to, like, Callie is my twin. Callie is my twin that I have been long lost from, and they are amazing and they're really, really brilliant. And if you ever have questions, don't like totally bomb their DMs and everything, but they're an extremely open person to talking and to exploring information and helping you to understand that information. So yeah, I just want to give a big shout out, but I also want to follow up on some of the comments that are in that video, for not the one that I stitched, but the one that is PDA and autism where to start video. I've been seeing a few comments talk about, and it's really great discussion of how PDA can really actually be, the symptoms that look like PDA are actually more symptoms of like trauma-based responses or responses and reactions that are more based on anxiety-induced experiences. And the reason why I'd like to further the discussion about PDA and the examples that we see here on TikTok is that the examples that people give primarily stem from personal experience. And it's not to say those personal experiences aren't invalid, but it's kind of a disservice to say that their experiences could potentially be PDA when, again, PDA is not something that is a diagnosable label at this point. The symptoms in which they express as examples are very closely aligned to our B2 characteristics of the autism category in the assessments. And those differences or as far as those reactions as to changing a routine and in which you're doing something in a shift of what you're focusing on, or when you're in those states of wanting to react coming from somebody who is like who's interrupting you, and I feel like that's more of what's triggering for that reaction. And it's all individualized in a way, but I think that comes into play a lot more than potentially what is like PDA or a sense of wanting to control the situation. It's more of the expression of like us wanting, based off our traumatic experiences in the past, to have control of what we're doing, to have control and focus of what is being done, and not necessarily PDA itself and this kind of autonomy or this kind of abstract idea that we need to have control when it comes to being an autistic person. Because if we're basing pathological demand avoidance on the fact of like demand avoidance itself and saying that somebody doesn't want to react or do something because it threatens their sense of authority, that is such a huge claim to make, and it applies in so many aspects of just our life. I have my friend Dre who talks about and says, we're demand to do pretty much anything we don't want to do when it comes to any kind of rules, when it comes to stopping at a stoplight, demand avoidance. If that were really true for PDA, then that means we would be rampant with like not wanting to follow rules and structure. And that also kind of goes against the autistic spectrum of us wanting to follow rules and structure. Like we want rules and routines. So I don't think, at least for that aspect when it talks about PDA, applies. And it also makes me want to question PDA more, because how can me, as a very autistic person, want to go against the demands of my routines. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but just as the many examples that I'm seeing, I feel like it's more, again, rooted to our rigidity as being autistic people, our rigidity and our need for structure, routine, and focus. And again, that's more of the B2 characteristic, is that we need the structure, routine, focus, and anything that interrupts that structure, routine, that's what triggers our reaction of like anxiety or stress, or again, it could be those routines or things we make up or we have based off of traumatic or stressful experiences. And to us, that's what helps to create control. But PDA itself, in which they're talking about it, they're trying to talk about it as it's a separate thing from autism, a separate thing that then is associated with autism. But the examples they give are really, really connected to being autistic. So I don't know, we need to discuss more for sure. And I love seeing the discussions that's being made in the comments and people talking about this, because I think in order to help us, if we have these issues of very intense reactions to people interrupting our routines or structures, that is where we're going to need to see how we can help each other. That is where we're going to need to see how services and things like that and communication with loved ones and those around us will need to be more resolved, rather than saying, it's my PDA. It's my, like, if that is true, then how is somebody going to help you? You know, it's going to be very extremely difficult for you to communicate that, as well as somebody who wants to help, not to make sure that they're triggering any kind of a reaction that could make you feel like that activates your fight or flight. A lot of these symptoms could be tangible to other traits or disorders. Here's a screenshot of something that Callie just mentioned to me when it came to that study about pathological demand avoidance, that some of these traits are very closely aligned to OCD. And so it's not saying that pathological demand avoidance is OCD or vice versa, but again, it makes it very complex to say that, yes, this is specifically PDA, and we have so many of these traits and these symptoms that they're saying are attributed to PDA, but they're connected to so many other layers of things, of autism and other actual personality disorders. So again, it's not, since PDA is not a diagnosable label, I personally think we shouldn't be saying that we have PDA or I have PDA, because if it's not diagnosable and it doesn't have clearly specified traits into which classify somebody into PDA, then that's not a label that we can definitively say we have.